Hi, my name is Callie Chappelle, and thanks for watching this video, Introduction to Counterplans, Part 3, AF Basics. This video is part of a larger series, obviously, about counterplans, and is also part of my video series, the Novice Go Fight Win Novice Debate series. So my name is Callie Chappelle again, and I'm a debater for the University of Michigan. I debated for Traverse City Central High School, and I'm a 2N1A. One thing that I really love, a fun fact about me, is that I love reading dissats to counterplans in the 1AR. So welcome. So to make the most out of these videos, you should take notes and rewatch bits that you need re-explained. Hopefully we'll have a worksheet and or supplemental materials that will go along with this video, so check out the video description to see whether you can find those things there. Also, you don't need to memorize it all, but we do want you to be familiar with everything in the video. Especially with the permutation, this information will carry on to many different arguments, such as critiques, and even disadvantages, so it's an important concept for you to be able to grasp. And finally, your coach may like things differently, or you may like to debate a different style. That's totally okay. This is not an end point, this is just a starting point. So here's Throwback Thursday. So we had two previous videos to this one. Part 1 was just about the basics, so the introduction to the counterplan, parts of the counterplan, and counterplan competition. And then we had Part 2, which was neg basics. So this was the type of counterplans, how to extend a counterplan, and then how to kick out of a counterplan. So this video is going to focus on how, as the affirmative, you answer counterplans. Alright, so basically, the AF wants to make the same sorts of arguments that they would make on the negative if the counterplan were an AF plan, plus a few counterplan-specific theory arguments. So think about yourself as the AF is kind of having a role reversal, right? So if I was neg and I was hitting an AF, how would I answer it? Well, if I'm AF and I'm hitting the counterplan, you need to ask yourself many of the same questions. So here's a list of 6 things that the AF should be arguing against the counterplan. First, the counterplan does not solve the AF. So the mechanism of the counterplan is one where the AF advantages are not solved. For example, if you are reading the aquaculture AF, you can argue that the mechanism of the counterplan doesn't solve food wars, for example. The second is the counterplan links to the negative's DA. So if the neg, as I said, is reading a DA as the net benefit, then you can argue that the counterplan links to the net benefit. Therefore, the counterplan is not net better than the plan, right? So that the neg has to prove that. The neg has to prove the counterplan is net beneficial. And by proving that the negative's DA links to the counterplan, you prove that the counterplan is not net beneficial. Third is that the AF can read a new DA to the counterplan. Just like you can read a DA to an AF, the AF can read DAs to counterplans. Fourth is that the AF can make arguments regarding the disposition of the counterplan. So that would be conditionality. That'll be in part 4 of the counterplan lecture series. 5 is the AF can argue that the type of counterplan that the neg is reading is illegitimate. So theory, such as arguing that, say, at fiat is illegitimate, that PICs are bad, or that agent counterplans are bad, these are examples of theory arguments against counterplans. This will also be covered in later videos. And 6, the AF can argue that the counterplan does not compete and therefore should be rejected. So this is the permutation. Okay, so we talked about the permutation a little bit in the very first video about counterplans, but we're going to detail it more here. So let's talk about the permutation. Remember, it's not the perm that Chutney has in Legal Avon. It's not something that makes your hair curly. Instead, it is a test of competition for the counterplan. So let's talk about quickly perms in the real world. So actually, it's a math thing, which I learned about first through debate, but then when I was taking the ACT and the SAT, they had questions about permutations. So Merriam-Webster says that a perm is often a fundamental change based on primarily the rearrangement of existing elements, or a form of variety resulting from such a change. Or it's the active process of changing the lineal order in an ordered set of objects, or an order arrangement of a set of objects. So essentially, perm is just testing the order of things, right? So in the context of debate, you can do the AF alone, you can do the counterplan alone, or you can make a permutation of both the AF and the counterplan by putting them together. Okay, so doing you in general, doing the AF and the counterplan at the same time is how you should think about it in this case. So perms in a debate. So it's pretty much the same thing, right? The perm is a way that the AF asks the judge to imagine a combination of the AF plan and all or part of the counterplan, right? So here's the AF plan, it's in pink, and here's the counterplan is in green. So the permutation, or like the general type of permutation, the permutation to do both, is a mixture of the pink and the green right here, okay? So why is this important? Counterplan competition. So here's a quick reminder. What does a neg have to win on the counterplan? Pause the video, write it down, or say it out loud. Okay, here's the answer coming at you. First, the counterplan is net beneficial. So, as we've talked about, usually it's a disadd that links to the AF but doesn't link to the plan. Second, the counterplan is mutually exclusive with the AF. That is, it's net worse for the AF and the counterplan to happen at the same time. Third, it's these two. And hey, that sounds like what the perm does, right? That you have to, the neg has to prove that it's net worse for the AF and the counterplan to happen at the same time. Well, the AF and the counterplan happening at the same time sounds like a perm. Well, you're right. The perm tests whether the counterplan and the plan are competitive, right? So that's what that means. When we're talking, remember back in the first video, we're talking about counterplan competition, and we're talking about whether the counterplan is not beneficial and whether it's mutually exclusive. When we did all those questions, like, how is it competitive with the privatization counterplan in Japan? Well, that's testing whether the AF and the plan can happen at the same time. That's testing competition, okay? All these things interrelate in this way. So arguing that the counterplan does not compete is a very powerful tool for the AF. So if it's both possible to do the plan and the counterplan, so it's possible and it's also desirable to do both, then the negative loses. In other words, the perm has to be better than doing the counterplan alone. And ideally, like, the perm would be better than just doing the plan alone as well. So here's an important stipulation. For the AF to win on the perm, you have to win a net benefit to the perm. That is, you have to prove the perm is better than doing either the counterplan or the plan alone. Okay, so mostly this, like, if you win the perm, then the AF wins. If you win the plan is better than if you win the perm is better than the counterplan, the AF wins. If you win the plan is better than the counterplan, the AF wins. But if you win that the counterplan is better than the plan, or if you win the counterplan is better than the perm, then the neg wins, okay? So it makes sense why you'd have to win that the perm is better than the plan or the counterplan alone, e.g. having a net benefit. Okay, so let's talk, now that we kind of have an idea of, in general, what a permutation is in theory, let's talk about types of permutations and how that translates to actual debate rounds. So I'm going to use two different examples. The first is one that allows you to have a better conceptual understanding, so example 1. And the second one is one that talks about kind of the in-debate implications of these different permutations. So example 1 is our McDonald's example, right? So the AF is we should go to McDonald's, and the neg is we should go to Taco Bell instead, and the net benefit is I like fake Southwestern food better than burgers from McDonald's. Okay, so example 2, though, is the AF is the USFG should develop aquaculture, the neg is the private sector should develop aquaculture, and then the net benefit is this NASA trade-off DA. The federal spending on aquaculture trades off with NASA spending, which means that we can't deflect asteroids. So the first type of perm I want to talk to you about is perm do both. So this is the type of permutation we've been talking about, or that I've been characterizing, and kind of the lead up to actually explaining what the perm is, right? So it's doing the plan and the counterplan. And this is for counterplans that are not mutually exclusive with the AF in the way that they can't happen at the same time, right? So remember, we talked about one type of mutually exclusive counterplan is if one is increased aquaculture and the AF is increased aquaculture and the counterplan is decreased aquaculture. Obviously, you can't increase and decrease at the same time. So perm do both works, though, for the plans and counterplans that are not functionally mutually exclusive, okay? So here's our example of perm do both with example 1. So AF, go to McDonald's, neg, counterplan, go to Taco Bell. So perm do both would be let's go to Taco Bell and McDonald's. That way we can get the best of both worlds. That was not a Hannah Montana reference. All right, here's example number 2. Remember, so the AF was aquaculture, federal government does aquaculture, and the counterplan was private sector, do aquaculture. So perm do both in this world would look like this. Have the federal government and the private sector work together to develop aquaculture. So have both the federal government and the private sector do it at the same time. That way, we don't have to worry about investment issues of the private sector, and we can be more efficient by taking it out of the hands of solely the government. So, look, notice something that's really important. So not only did I explain how we do both, but also why we do both. What would be the benefit of doing both at the same time? So with example 1, it's so we can get the best of both worlds. We can eat McDonald's and Taco Bell. For example 2, it will make it more efficient because the private sector is involved, but then it's not just, it also doesn't link to the spending trade-off DA, maybe. Alright, so here's an important note. This perm is okay if you do all the AF, but only part of the counterplan. So perm do both doesn't have to include all of the counterplan, it just has to include part of it. Alright, so perm to the counterplan is the next one. So perm to the counterplan is a perm that you use when the plan and the counterplan are the same thing. So for example, if the counterplan is have no one do the plan, and the plan uses NOAA, then the plan and the counterplan are the same thing. Thus, you would say perm do the counterplan. Okay? So, with the example number 1, if the plan is let's go to McDonald's and the counterplan is let's go to McDonald's, then you can just say perm do the counterplan. This is not doing both like the previous example, but if the counterplan is the same as the plan, then the neg just gave you a reason to vote F, right? Because the neg is saying, yeah, the F's a good idea, except for they're saying it as a counterplan, which doesn't make sense. So that's when you'd use perm do the counterplan. So this actually gets a little bit more confusing because you can explain the F to be the counterplan to make perm do the counterplan. For example, if you read the executive order counterplan, so the AF is aquaculture, and the neg counterplan is the federal government should implement aquaculture through an executive order. The AF could say, perm to the counterplan, the plan is implemented through an executive order. And then, essentially what you're doing is you're characterizing the AF in such a way that it is the counterplan, so you can go for perm to the counterplan. So how is this a test of competition? Like I said, if the counterplan and the plan are the same thing, then the counterplan is simply not competitive, right? It's not mutually exclusive and it's not net beneficial because it's the exact same thing as the plan. Next is severance perms. So severance perms is where you do all of the counterplan, but only some of the AF. So here's a picture. Oops, it says intrinsic perm, but it actually should, it actually should say severance here. So here's the AF, and here's a counterplan, and here is the severance perm, right? So the severance perm is this, right? So you do all the counterplan, but you take out some of the AF. Okay? So here's an example. Actually, let's go back. Let's talk about why you'd ever want to use a severance perm. Well, first, let's say the counterplan, actually, I'm just going to keep going. Let's talk about privatization, because this should answer your questions. Right, so plan is USFG does aquaculture. Counterplan is the private sector does aquaculture, with the net benefit being the NASA trade-off DA. So the severance perm would be, have the private sector and the USFG work together on aquaculture. So from there, it sounds like perm do both. But instead of having the USFG fund it, have the private sector fund the entire thing. Okay? So how does this sever? Well, it severs AF funding, right? Because with the normal plan by itself, the USFG would fund aquaculture, and with the normal counterplan, the private sector would fund it. So if you try to do both, then assumably you'd have both the USFG and the private sector funding it. But what this perm does is it cuts out USFG funding. Now, why would you want to cut out USFG funding? Well, let's think about what the net benefit is. The net benefit is to the counterplan is the NASA trade-off DA. And then that is in the NASA trade-off DA, the link is federal government spending. So if you characterize the perm where the federal government doesn't spend any money, but you're still doing both, then you get to suck up kind of the net benefit to the counterplan, but at the same time, so you don't link to the net benefit, but at the same time, you still solve all the benefits of doing the counterplan and the plan at the same time. So here's a disclaimer. So you're probably like, yeah, that sounds pretty sweet, right? But severance perms are considered cheating. And the neg team will make theory arguments about why you can't make these perms. So what I'm explaining to you is, like, you can characterize other perms to be functionally be severance perms, but you really shouldn't explicitly try to make them in debate rounds because they are considered cheating and you will get called out on theory. Alright, so here's some more common examples. First, the AFT is aquaculture, and we say the normal means is a bill through Congress with no environmental impact statement, or EIS, okay? So the AFT is just like our aquaculture, and the neg team says normal means is bill through Congress, no EIS. The counterplan is have the USFG do an EIS on the aquaculture technology before implementing it, thus making it a green technology. So this may take more time than the normal AF implementation. So we'd say perm to the counterplan. Normal means is doing an environmental impact statement because all projects have to do an EIS. Okay? So we're saying that there's no difference between the USFG doing aquaculture as normal means and the USFG doing aquaculture with an EIS because an EIS is federally mandated for every single program. Okay? So in that case, remember, perm to the counterplan, we're saying perm to the counterplan because in EIS, the counterplan is the exact same thing as just in general doing it, the AF, because it's normal means. Okay? So the neg might say that this is severance because the AF severs out of their time frame, which is immediate, right? So one of the stipulations of the counterplan is doing an EIS, doing this kind of overall impact analysis statement, will cause the AF to be implemented later in the future. So instead of it being implemented is like 10 months after the bill is passed, it may be implemented 2 years after the bill is passed. So the neg may be tricky and say it's severance. Well, at first you'd be like, no, because it's perm to the counterplan. Well, no, it's severance, the neg will explain, because they're severing out of their time frame, which is immediate. You're saying, when you say your AF, that the bill has to happen as soon as the judge signs their ballot. But the bill may not happen if you're doing an EIS until way far down the road, or it won't be implemented until many years down the road, which means that there's a distinction between the AF and the counterplan. The AF happens right away, the counterplan happens in a long time from now. So that means the AF and the counterplan are not the same thing, and therefore you cannot do perm, do the counterplan, okay, because that is severance out of time frame. So that's a little bit more confusing, and if you don't understand that, that's totally okay. What I would do is I just kind of like rest on it, think about it a little bit, try to use some other resources, talk to your varsity, talk to your debate coach, and if you still don't understand, actually come back and rewatch the section of the video, and after thinking about it, this may make more sense to you. Alright, so here's the big idea. Severance isn't just tangible things as the plan. This is the big idea from this particular side. The AF can sever many things, such as immediacy, certainty, the counterplan may or may not mean the plan happens, funding, or certain mechanisms. Some types of counterplans are called consult counterplans. So instead of just doing the AF, the counterplan has us consult another country or consult another organization before doing the plan. And that organization can say yes or no to doing the plan. So why don't we just do perm, do both, right? Well, or why don't we just do perm to the counterplan? Well, it's because it would sever certainty, right? Because the counterplan is uncertain, because you don't know whether that country, that organization will say yes or no to doing the plan. Whereas the AF is 100% certain that when you sign the bill, the plan will happen. That's fiat. So it's important to understand that severance perms and just perms in general may include kind of non-tangible things that you wouldn't normally expect. So these things are a little bit confusing, and the best way to learn more about them is to just watch debates that involve kind of these more complicated perm techniques, and also just reading through files and reading through neg and AF like perm information, like perm cards, and that'll really clear up kind of this understanding for you, okay? So severance perms theory. So when the AF and neg debates whether or not severance perms are okay or not, you use a theory block. So these are pre-scripted arguments regarding the merits of making the argument. So severance perms theory is way too in-depth for this lecture, but we mainly want you to have an idea of what a severance perm is. So if you want to learn more, you definitely should wait for a later video or check out severance perms theory block on your team Dropbox or just online. But you should know that there is such thing as a severance perm, and yes, the neg team may read theory if you make this argument, okay? So here's the next part. This is the intrinsic perm. So these are the perms that include all the AF, okay? So all the AF, all the counterplan, and then some extra stuff. So before I add the extra stuff, this is just all of the AF and all of the counterplan, right? Because it's the mixture of the pink and the green color. So the intrinsic perm would be all of the AF, all of the counterplan, and Nick Cage. Okay? This is the extra stuff. He's extra. Alright, so here are some examples of intrinsic perms. So we should go to, the intrinsic perm is we should go to McDonald's, the AF, and go to Taco Bell, the counterplan, and go to Whole Foods, the intrinsic part. So it's where we add just a whole other thing to make it all work together. So here's another example. We should have the USFG do aquaculture, AF. We should have the private sector do aquaculture, neg, and Japan should do aquaculture, the intrinsic part, right? So here is the disclaimer again, like severance perms, these perms can be considered cheating and other teams may read theory. So let's go back to this example actually, because why would you ever want to add something, right? Well, sometimes there's a reason why doing both is bad, right? So having the USFG and the private sector, there's a reason why they shouldn't do it, because it'll cause overlap, for example. If the USFG just automatically implemented aquaculture and the private sector independently also did the exact same thing, there'd be a lot of overlap and there'd be a lot of inefficiencies. So an example of an intrinsic perm for this case is the intrinsic part could be the part that resolves the reasons why doing both is a bad idea. So the intrinsic part could be have the USFG do aquaculture, have the private sector do aquaculture, and have them work together using a private public-private partnership, or a P3. So that part would be intrinsic, right? Because a P3 is not part of the AF, and a P3 is not part of the counterplan. But we're gonna add that to make it work together. But keep in mind, you should keep a wary eye out, AF or neg, about intrinsic perms, just like severance perms, because they are considered cheating, and you can hear theory that I just described to you. So, as an AF, how do you get good at debating the perm? Well, the biggest thing is, actually explain something. I can't believe how many times I've seen debates or participated in debates where the AF's just like, perm to both, perm to the counterplan. And then in the 2AR, they're just like, extend the perm to the counterplan, blah, 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 blah. It's like, I have no idea what perm to the counterplan even looks like. I have no idea what perm to both looks like. I just don't, and it's not persuasive to me, because there's nothing in my mind that I can picture as being the permutation. So it's really important for you to explain. It's easy to say, vote on perm to both. But what the heck does that mean? Explain what the world of the permutation looks like. Compare this to the world of the counterplan alone. And guess what is net benefit to the perm? The AF. So instead of saying, we should just do perm to both, do the counterplan that the federal government does it, and also do the plan the federal government does it, and also do the counterplan that the private sector does it. Instead of stopping there, be like, this is a good idea because it will have more cooperation between the private sector and the federal government, which causes greater overlap and decreases inefficiency, right? So that's explaining how that would actually work, right? So you can make this really persuasive by explaining how doing both works together, right? And you'll be like, well, why is that better? Well, all the reasons why the federal government is good, given by our AF, are net benefits to the permutation. All right, so it's your turn. So we're going to go through some examples, and you're going to tell me the best perm to use in each situation. So just think perm to both or perm to the counterplan right now. You don't need to worry about intrinsic or severance perms. All right, so here's the first example, the XO counterplan. So the AF is USFG should do aquaculture, and the neg strat is counterplan, the USFG should do aquaculture through an executive order rather than through Congress. The net benefit is the executive powers DA. So it says that right now, executive powers are declining. We need the president to do the plan to reignite his presidential power. Pres power is key to military flexibility, which is key to American hegemony. So which perm would you use here? Pause the video, think about it, write down what perm you think it would be, and then explain to me, or explain to via paper, why that perm is best. Okay, I don't know why there's not another slide after this. All right, so what you should have said is perm do the counterplan. Now, why would I say perm do the counterplan? Well, nowhere in the AF do you ever specify that you don't use an executive order. So it's totally valid for you to say the USFG doing aquaculture would normally be done through an executive order. So you need to explain why normal means is an executive order, or why the plan would be implemented that way. But perm to the counterplan is relatively the least path of resistance. And why? Because you don't have to refute the DA. All you have to do is say that the plan is the counterplan, and then you suck up the net benefit, the executive powers DA. Now think about a world where we said perm do both. Well, what would this world look like? Well, if the plan is indeed a bill passed through Congress, then we'd have a bill that Congress ratifies that the USFG does aquaculture. So, okay, so we're going to do aquaculture already. But then you also have the president say we should do aquaculture. And then that also happens through an executive order. So that means that we have two different aquaculture programs happening at the same time. Well, it seems like that's pretty great grounds for a disadvantage, right? Because that seems inefficient, that seems really expensive. There's no reason why we should do these two things at the same time. So to play it safe, it might be easier just to say, well, the counterplan is the plan by going with perm to the counterplan, rather than trying to explain why doing a program twice, probably inefficiently, is a good idea. Okay? So, big ideas on the perm. First, never, never, never forget to make the perm. You should make the perm in all F speeches besides the 1AC, unless they decide to kick out of the counterplan. Okay, I've seen so many debates where the counterplan is just really, really stupid, but the AF forgets to make a perm and loses on a really dumb counterplan. So never forget to make it. Make the perm do both and perm do the counterplan in the 2AC on every single counterplan, but decide by the 1AR which one is best in the round and explain only one very well. So choose, so make both in the 2AC, but choose one and go with it in the 1AR. Okay, so what are other arguments that I make on the counterplan besides the perm? Obviously, you want to have more arguments in your toolbox against the counterplan. So the first one is the counterplan doesn't solve the AF. Straight up, the counterplan stinks. Give reasons why the counterplan doesn't solve the AF mechanism. For example, why the private sector just simply can't do aquaculture, or why the counterplan doesn't solve the AF advantages. So, for example, the private sector can't produce enough food to solve food wars. Okay, so there are 2 reasons why the counterplan may not solve the AF, and you should explain both. Okay, and you should also read cards on both. The second argument you can make is the counterplan links to the net benefit. This is a super easy way to take out the counterplan. So think back to how the negative wins on a counterplan. They have to prove the counterplan is net beneficial. If the negative does not prove the counterplan is net beneficial, then the negative loses, right? So it's really easy to just take out the net benefit. So you can do this one of 2 ways. First, you can argue that the disad that serves as the net benefit links to the counterplan, right? So the reason why it's the net benefit to begin with is because it doesn't link to the counterplan. So if you prove the counterplan isn't better than the AF, or they both link to the DA, then you win. Okay, so for example, with the, let's say you have an advantage counterplan, and then you have the AF. So let's talk about the aquaculture AF. And you have the aquaculture AF with the food wars advantage, that aquaculture will increase the new food supply, which will solve for food wars. So let's say the negative stands up and says we should have an advantage, we have an advantage counterplan, and the advantage counterplan just increases the global food supply. So we create biodomes that grow food. And the reason why that's better than the plan is because biodomes are very popular in Congress, so it doesn't trigger the politics DA, whereas aquaculture is very unpopular in Congress, so that would trigger the politics DA. So what you can do is stand up and be like, no, actually, biodomes are extremely unpopular in Congress. They also link to the politics DA, so I'm taking out the net benefit to the counterplan, right? So you can prove the counterplan links to the net benefit DA. Also, you can just take out the DA using our offense or defense, independently of the counterplan as well. That was covered in the DA lecture. So if you just beat the DA, if you just beat the politics DA, then that is also a reason why the counterplan is not net beneficial, right? And if the neg doesn't have a net benefit, then the perm is the best option. So, for example, if the net benefit is the spending DA, prove the counterplan spends money. Therefore, the counterplan links to the spending DA. If the net benefit is the politics DA, prove the counterplan is unpopular in Congress. Okay, so just prove that the counterplan links to the net benefit, or just take out the DA. I will have one quick stipulation that if you take out the DA, there could still be a small risk of the DA, which may still be enough of a reason why the counterplan is net better than the AF. So you really have to kill the DA if you're going to go that way. The next thing you can do is read a DA to the counterplan. Wait a minute, I thought only the neg reads DAs. Well, that doesn't mean that you can't give reasons why the counterplan is a bad idea, right? Like I said at the beginning, you should pretend when you're answering a counterplan that as the AF, you're actually the neg answering an AF, right? The neg would answer an AF using a DA, so you can use a DA as an AF to answer the counterplan. Okay. Well, maybe it's not a full DA with uniqueness, link, and impact, but you should still give reasons why the counterplan is a bad idea, just like the fundamental idea of a DA. So, for example, the 50 states all implementing aquaculture causes major investor confusion, which hurts the economy, right? That's a DA to the counterplan, even if it's not like a full off-case, quote-unquote, off-case argument, but it's still a reason why the counterplan is a bad idea. The final thing you can do is give theoretical reasons why the counterplan is bad. So the first one is conditionality. So this will be covered in part 4, and I'll talk about that then. And the second part is the specific type of counterplan they're reading is bad. So you can say that agent counterplans are bad if they read an agent counterplan. If they read a process counterplan, you can say process counterplans are bad. If they read a PIC, you can say PIC's bad. Or if they read an international counterplan, an international agent counterplan, you can say international agent counterplans are bad. So you should it's important for you to be able to identify what type of counterplan it is, so you can read the right type of theory about why reading that kind of counterplan is theoretically illegitimate. So things you should have learned in this lecture. I know this one was a long one, but there's kind of a lot to understand when you're AF answering counterplans. First, you should know the major ways that the AF can answer a counterplan. Those were I believe the 9 reasons that I gave at the beginning of this lecture. Second, you should know what a perm is. Next, you should know the type of perm, the type of perms that there are. So what were they again? If you said perm do both, perm do the counterplans, severance perms, and intrinsic perms, you'd be right. And finally, you should get a feel for what types of perms are best against different counterplans. And that's just kind of a thing that you'll develop with time and skill. But the more you expose yourself to different counterplans, and the more you expose yourself to thinking about the permutation in a theoretical sense, the more comfortable you will be at learning these things. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was educational for you, and I hope to see you in part 4 of Counterplans. Thanks.